Your spine never healed correctly, the neurologist said, her voice cutting through the examination room like a blade. The words landed differently this time. After 15 years of being told my paralysis was irreversible, unexplainable, just something I'd have to accept, those words meant everything. I sat in my wheelchair, my hands pressed flat against the armrests. The chair felt suddenly foreign, like it didn't belong to me anymore. Dr. Patel pulled up an X-ray on the screen behind her. She pointed at something I'd never noticed before, something that should have been flagged the moment it appeared. My breath caught. This fracture was never properly aligned during your initial surgery, she continued. The bone healed in a way that compressed your spinal cord, gradually, over years. I couldn't move, not because of the paralysis, because of the weight of those words. 15 years. 15 years of accepting my fate, of building my entire life around limitations that didn't have to exist. 15 years of believing my body had simply failed me when the truth was something far worse. Someone had failed me. The first phone call I made was to my brother Vincent. He picked up on the second ring, and I could hear the television playing in the background, the ordinary sound of his ordinary evening. I told him what Dr. Patel had said. The silence that followed lasted so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller. "D-line," he said. "I need to tell you something." My stomach tightened. I knew that tone. I'd heard it only a few times in our lives, and each time it preceded something, and that was the point of no return. Vincent had been there. 15 years ago, when the accident happened, when I went into surgery, when I woke up paralyzed, he'd been the one holding my hand. He'd been the one the doctor spoke to while I was still medicated, barely conscious. He'd been the one who told me everything was going to be okay, even though it wasn't. The surgeon, Vincent said slowly, made a mistake during the operation. I knew about it. Dr. Harrison called me into his office before you woke up. He said there was a complication, that he'd tried to correct it, but that you might have permanent nerve damage. Vincent's voice cracked slightly. He asked me not to tell you. He said it would only cause you additional stress during recovery. He said the best thing for your healing was to focus on physical therapy, not on what happened in the operating room. I felt something shift inside me, some fundamental understanding of the past 15 years, reorganizing itself into a new shape. He gave me documents to sign, Vincent continued. Confidentiality agreements. He said if I spoke about it, if I told you, his insurance wouldn't cover anything. He said you'd lose any chance at compensation. He made it sound like telling you would hurt you more than staying silent would. I asked Vincent why he was telling me now. The answer came slowly, reluctantly, as if he'd been carrying this secret so long that speaking it aloud required a physical effort. He'd been diagnosed with stage 3 cancer 3 months ago. The doctors said he had maybe a year, possibly less. He'd spent those months thinking about all the choices he'd made, all the moments where he'd chosen silence over truth. He couldn't die with this secret still inside him. He couldn't let me spend the rest of my life not knowing. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I'd experienced before. It wasn't the hot, immediate anger of a moment. It was something colder, more comprehensive. It was the fury of someone who'd had her entire life constructed on a foundation of lies. Every decision I'd made in the past 15 years had been made under false assumptions. Every limitation I'd accepted, every dream I'd abandoned, every relationship I'd avoided because I didn't want to burden someone with my paralysis. All of it had been based on a lie. I hung up with Vincent and immediately called my lawyer. Thomas had been representing me for years, handling various disability claims and insurance matters. When I told him what I'd just learned, I heard him pull in a sharp breath. "Do you have documentation?" he asked. I didn't, but Vincent had the confidentiality agreements. He had the notes from his conversation with Dr. Harrison. He had emails from the hospital. He had 15 years of evidence that he'd kept, not knowing what to do with it, but unable to throw it away. The next morning, I sat in Thomas's office while he read through the documents Vincent had sent over. His expression grew darker with each page. "This is," he said carefully, "one of the most egregious cases of medical negligence I've seen in 20 years of practice." He explained what the documents showed. Dr. Harrison had indeed made a critical error during surgery. He'd damaged the spinal cord while attempting to repair the fracture. Instead of immediately disclosing this to me or to my family, he'd documented it privately, then instructed Vincent to keep silent. The confidentiality agreement was designed to protect the hospital's liability, not my health. Dr. Harrison had essentially bought my brother's silence with the threat of financial ruin. Thomas began the process of filing a lawsuit against Dr. Harrison and the hospital. He also contacted the state medical board. What had been done to me wasn't just malpractice. It was a deliberate conspiracy to conceal that malpractice. The hospital had prioritized its own financial protection over my health, over my right to know what had happened to my own body, over my ability to make informed decisions about my future. The discovery process took months. During that time, I learned things about my surgery that Dr. Harrison had never told me. The initial injury from the accident had been serious, but potentially recoverable. The damage to my spinal cord had occurred during the repair surgery itself. Dr. Harrison had nicked the cord while attempting to realign the vertebrae. Instead of stopping the procedure and consulting with a spinal cord specialist, he'd continued working. He'd then closed me up and hoped the damage would be minimal. It hadn't been minimal. The nick had caused inflammation, which had led to scar tissue formation, which had gradually compressed the cord until my lower body went numb, then immobile. But there was more. Hospital records showed that Dr. Harrison had performed the same procedure on 4 other patients in the same year. 2 of them had also experienced serious complications. One had passed away 2 years after surgery. Another had also become paralyzed. The hospital had settled with that patient's family quietly, confidentially, without any public acknowledgement of what had happened. The pattern was clear. Dr. Harrison had a technique that was flawed, and the hospital had known about it, and they'd done nothing to stop him. I found myself staring at old photographs from before the accident. Me at 30 years old, hiking with friends, my legs strong and sure beneath me. Me at a beach, running into the water. Me dancing at my cousin's wedding, my body moving through space with an ease I'd forgotten was possible. Those images belonged to someone else now, someone who no longer existed. But that person could have continued existing. That person didn't have to disappear. Vincent started chemotherapy. I visited him during his treatments, watching him grow weaker as the poison designed to save his life did its work. We didn't talk much about the lawsuit. We didn't need to. He'd already given me what he could give me. The truth. Everything else was just consequence. The deposition with Dr. Harrison happened on a cold morning in March. I sat in the wheelchair in the conference room, facing the man who'd changed the trajectory of my entire life. He was older now, grayer, but his expression was defensive rather than remorseful. His lawyer sat beside him, a sharp-eyed woman who looked like she'd defended medical professionals against accusations before. Thomas asked him about the surgery, about the complication, about the decision to keep it from me. Dr. Harrison's answers were carefully crafted, each one designed to minimize his responsibility. He said the complication was minor. He said he'd addressed it as best he could in the moment. He said he'd consulted with my brother because my brother was my emergency contact and had a right to know the medical facts. He said the confidentiality agreement was standard hospital procedure. He said he'd recommended physical therapy because he believed my recovery would be best served by aggressive rehabilitation. He said he'd never intended to deceive me. He'd simply been trying to protect me from unnecessary worry. Thomas presented him with the records of the other patients. Dr. Harrison's composure cracked slightly. His lawyer objected repeatedly, but the records were clear. The pattern was undeniable. By the end of the deposition, Dr. Harrison had stopped trying to defend himself and simply sat in silence, his jaw clenched. The case went to trial in the fall. The courtroom was cold and formal, all dark wood and official seals. I sat in the wheelchair at the front, Thomas beside me. The hospital's legal team was there in force, 3 lawyers in expensive suits, ready to fight for every dollar they could save. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Thomas presented the evidence methodically. He showed the hospital records. He called expert witnesses who testified that the standard of care Dr. Harrison had provided fell far below what any competent surgeon should have done. He called a neurologist who testified that with proper treatment immediately after the injury, there was a reasonable probability I could have recovered significant function. He called Vincent, who sat in the witness box and told the entire story, his voice steady despite the pain visible in his face. He told about the conversation with Dr. Harrison. He told about the confidentiality agreement. He told about carrying the secret for 15 years, watching his sister build a life around a disability that might have been preventable. The hospital's defense was that I'd received appropriate post-operative care, that I'd been given the best available physical therapy, that the outcome couldn't have been significantly different even with full disclosure. Their expert witnesses testified that spinal cord injuries were unpredictable, that recovery was rarely complete, that I should be grateful for the level of function I retained. Their lawyers tried to paint me as someone seeking a windfall, someone trying to blame the medical profession for the natural consequences of a serious accident. But the judge wasn't buying it. The evidence was too clear. The pattern of behavior was too damning. The confidentiality agreement was too obviously designed to protect the hospital rather than the patient. On the last day of testimony, the judge ruled in my favor. She ordered the hospital to pay damages of $4 million. She also ordered an investigation into Dr. Harrison's license, recommending that the state medical board consider revocation. I didn't feel victorious. Sitting in the wheelchair in the courtroom, listening to the judgment, I felt something more complicated. The money couldn't give me back my legs. It couldn't give me back the 15 years I'd spent believing my body had failed me. It couldn't give me back the relationships I hadn't pursued, the career I hadn't built, the life I hadn't lived, because I'd thought I was limited in ways I didn't actually have to be. But it could do something else. It could acknowledge that what had been done to me was wrong. It could prove that I wasn't crazy for feeling like something was missing from the story I'd been told. It could validate the rage I'd been carrying, the sense that my life had been stolen from me not by the accident, but by the choices made after it. Vincent died 3 months after the verdict. The cancer took him quickly in the end, his body simply giving up. I was holding his hand when he went. His last words to me were, "I'm sorry it took me so long to tell you." I told him it was okay. I told him he'd given me the greatest gift he could have given me, the truth. After his death, I made a decision. The settlement money was sitting in my account, more money than I'd ever imagined having. But money wasn't what I needed. What I needed was to understand what my life could have been if I'd known the truth earlier. What I needed was to figure out who I was without the story of paralysis that had defined me for so long. I started working with a new physical therapist, one who specialized in spinal cord injuries and recovery. I told her what the neurologist had said, that my paralysis was caused by a surgical error rather than by irreversible nerve damage. I told her about the 15 years I'd spent believing recovery was impossible. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "D-line, I can't promise you'll walk again. The damage is real, and it's been there for a long time. But I can promise you that we haven't tried everything yet. And I can promise you that you're stronger than you think." We started with small things: electrical stimulation therapy, intensive physical therapy, experimental treatments that had shown promise in other spinal cord injury patients. Some of it helped, some of it didn't. After 6 months, I had more sensation in my legs than I'd had in years. After a year, I could move my toes on command. After 2 years, I could stand for short periods with support. It wasn't the full recovery I might have had if the surgery had been done correctly. It was better than I'd thought possible. The day I took my first step in 15 years, I was in the physical therapy clinic with my therapist watching. It was only a few steps, holding on to parallel bars, my legs shaking with effort. But I did it. My feet touched the ground in sequence. My body moved through space under my own power. I cried. Not tears of joy exactly, though there was some of that. Tears of grief for the years I'd lost. Tears of anger that it had taken this long. Tears of something I didn't have a name for. Some complicated emotion that was all of those things at once. I started speaking publicly about my case. Medical conferences invited me to talk about patient rights and the importance of informed consent. Disability advocacy groups asked me to share my story. News outlets ran stories about the settlement and the investigation into Dr. Harrison. He lost his medical license. The hospital implemented new protocols for handling surgical complications. Other patients came forward with their own stories of being silenced, of being kept in the dark about medical errors that had changed their lives. I moved into a new apartment, one without the wheelchair ramps and modifications I'd had installed 15 years ago. I didn't need them anymore. My body could navigate stairs now, though it was slower than it had been before the accident. I could drive again. I could travel. I could do things I'd thought were lost to me forever. But I also had to grieve. Grief for the life I didn't get to live. Grief for the relationships I didn't pursue because I thought I was too broken. Grief for the career I didn't build because I thought my disability would be a barrier. Grief for the version of myself who'd accepted the story she was told without question, who'd trusted the people in authority to tell her the truth about her own body. Today, 5 years after the verdict, I walk with a cane. My legs still aren't what they were before the accident, but they're functional. I'm remarried to a man I met at a disability advocacy conference. I work as a consultant for hospitals, helping them develop protocols to protect patient rights. I've become an advocate for informed consent, for transparency in medicine, for the radical idea that patients deserve to know the truth about what happens to their bodies. Vincent's memory lives on in everything I do. His choice to tell me the truth, even though it cost him, even though it came so late, was the thing, and that was the point of no return. It was the moment I stopped accepting the narrative that had been written for me and started writing my own. The paralysis is still there. I'll never have the full use of my legs that I had before. But the paralysis that kept me trapped for 15 years, the paralysis of not knowing, of accepting what I was told without question, of building my identity around a story that wasn't true, that paralysis is gone. And it turns out that was the one that mattered most. If you've been told something about your body or your life that doesn't sit right with you, trust that instinct. Seek second opinions. Ask questions. Demand the truth. Your life depends on it.